What's up guys, Michael Kamalu here, aka Dr. Gaines, and this will be one of the most important videos that I make for those wanting to improve their physical fitness. It's a well-researched and documented fact that people who regularly set and achieve specific goals accomplish significantly more in their lives than those who do not. However, the vast majority of us will maybe set a few goals around New Year's that last maybe a few weeks or even a couple days. Well, that's because in order to succeed at setting and achieving goals, you have to know how this works. Before I went to medical school, my undergraduate degree was actually in neuroscience. I have always been fascinated by the brain, its complexity, and how we can use our understanding of the brain to optimize all the various different parts of our lives. I have studied it immensely, and in this video, I'm going to give you several of the best neuroscience-based tips that will allow you to manipulate and even hack your own brain to help you succeed in achieving your fitness goals, as well as any other goals that you set for your life. Now, you'll want to watch this video all the way through because many of these tips, they will build on each other. So it's important to understand some of the first ones before getting into the next ones, because as in all of my videos, I'm not just going to tell you what to do, but I will help you understand why they work the way that they do so that you can customize these tips to best fit your specific goals. Let's get to it. Before going into these specific tips, there's a couple things we need to understand. And first is that a lot of these strategies are built around a principle called neuroplasticity, which basically means that the brain has the ability to rewire itself, and extensively. For example, in a normal brain, the sense of touch, that is processed by an area called the somatosensory cortex, which is right here across the middle of the brain. And the sense of vision, visual stimuli, that is processed by an area of the brain at the very back called the primary visual cortex. However, in a study done in 2001, researchers took a group of people who had become blind. They weren't born blind, but had lost their ability to see in some point in their lives. And they hooked these participants up to machines that can record brain activity and localize it so they can see what areas of the brain are firing. And they had them read Braille. And Braille is, of course, brushing over dots with fingers, and certain dot patterns mean different letters, different words. And what they saw was that when these blind people were reading with their fingers, it was their visual cortex that was lighting up, not the somatosensory cortex, and those are super far away from each other in the brain. So why in the world would that be? Well, when these people lost their ability to see, all of a sudden the brain had a lot more need to have very sensitive touch. And so what it did is it just completely took over a different part of the brain and rewired the visual cortex to process tactile stimuli. Absolutely amazing. And with many of these strategies, we're going to tap into that neuroplasticity of the brain to rewire it in order to better facilitate our goals. The second principle to understand is that when we set a goal, there are a couple different areas of the brain that light up and become activated. The first is the frontal cortex. So this area in the front of the brain. That is the logical problem-solving area of our brain. So when we are actively, consciously thinking of things and making decisions, that's frontal cortex. The other part is the amygdala, and the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. And that is what tells us how much we want something. And then there is the anterior cingulate cortex, which lies between the two, and it bridges the two. So when you're setting a goal, the frontal cortex will analyze the goal and logically say, okay, what is this goal and how are we capable of doing it? And then the amygdala will say, okay, how badly do we want to do this? What is the value? And then the anterior cingulate cortex, which we'll call the ACC, will take input from the two and decide whether we're going to proceed forward with that goal or give up. Strategy number 1 is activation of subconscious goal pursuit. Under some conditions, we can have actions initiated in our brain, in our body, without being aware of what caused us to take those actions or that we are motivated in any way. Some of you may have heard of subliminal messaging, and what that is, what subliminal means, is it's any type of stimulation or cues that are beneath our conscious perception. So we're not aware of having perceived it, yet it still affects us. And some of you may get skeptical here and say, subconscious or subliminal messaging, that's a bunch of myths, doesn't really work. Well, it's real, it is effective, and you can use it on yourself. Dozens of studies have proven that subliminal cues do affect our actions even though we are unconscious of them. A study done in 2001 had a group of students participating in several intellectual games and challenges, and what they discovered was that when some of the group was subconsciously exposed to achievement-related words such as strive, succeed, win, compete, achieve, they were significantly more effective and they performed much better on the challenges than students who were not exposed to those words, even though the first group was not conscious of having been exposed to those words. That's called language priming. And it doesn't just happen with achievement-related words. This has been shown with dozens of different behaviors. For example, people who are exposed to words suggestive of cooperation, like help, friendly, assist, they are much more likely to engage in helpful behavior, assisting those around them and cooperating as a team than those who were not exposed to those words. And this isn't limited to just words or language. Another study done in 2003 had a group of people participating in a study that went across multiple different rooms. And what they found was that when people entered an office, they became much more competitive if there was a leather briefcase on the desk. And in a different room, they talked more softly when there was a picture of a library on the wall. And in another room, people cleaned their desk and the area around them much more frequently when there was a vague scent of cleaning agent in the air. And it's important to understand that none of these people were aware of being influenced by any of these objects. There was no significance to them of the briefcase or the picture. They were just everyday objects. And when asked afterwards, people didn't notice that there was a scent of cleaning agents in the air, yet despite not having consciously perceived these, they were affected by them and they did change their behavior because of them. Now, there are two other kinds of subliminal messaging and priming that are important for our strategy here. First, there was another study done in 2003 that demonstrated relationship priming. And what that is that they showed when you have a representation of a relationship near you, for example, there is a shirt that was given to you by your mother, you automatically and subconsciously start to act more in line with that person's goals and values. No matter who it is, if the relationship is strong enough, even though the person is not there in the room with you, they could be, however far away, if there is anything that represents that relationship within your vicinity, you will subconsciously start to act more in line with that person's values and goals. And then finally, this has been proven to be true with social group priming as well. When people are subconsciously primed with a social group that's associated with helping others, such as nursing, they are more likely to help people around them. Or when people are subconsciously exposed to social groups involved with competitiveness or with the drive to make money, they automatically become more competitive and have a greater drive to pursue goals that are associated with that social group. So why is this happening? Well, the frontal cortex is limited in what it's able to focus on at a time. We can't focus in on something, even though there's a bunch of other stimuli coming in, other sounds, other scents, other sights. We focus on specific things, but our brain is still registering everything else, just not consciously. So what's happening is these stimuli are bypassing the frontal lobe and they're going straight to that ACC and other brain regions that are subconscious. And these brain regions, they can connect directly to the motor cortex. So they can actually initiate behavior and motion even though we're not even conscious that those stimuli came in the first place. So in our first hack, you're going to take advantage of this and subliminally cue yourself towards your fitness goals. So we're going to do this in 4 different ways. One is that you surround yourself with language related to your goal. A great way to do that is just to write words related to your goal on sticky notes and put them around the areas that you frequently walk through. So you put them on your mirror, put them on the hallway, put them in your car. And even though throughout the day, you're most likely not going to be consciously looking and reading all of those notes, your brain will be processing them and it will activate actions and drive you towards that goal subconsciously. You can also do this with physical objects, dumbbells, jump ropes, any object that is associated with your goals, leave them lying around in different parts of your house or your office or wherever you can. And then take advantage of the relationship and social group priming as well. Try to spend as much time as you can with people who have the same values and the same goals that you do, or at least for this specific goal, you want to try to spend time or even have things around you that remind you of people who are also striving for that goal or maybe already achieved it and you want to be more like them. This social group priming is one reason why it is very effective and beneficial to work out at a gym, because subconsciously you are being affected and activated by being around that type of a group. Now, there's still the motivation aspect here, because by bypassing the frontal lobe, we have activated the goal without even realizing it or intentionally doing it. But if we don't have that motivation aspect as well, then we're not going to continue or persist with that goal. But luckily, you can also subliminally activate motivation. In a study done in 2008, researchers had participants squeeze a handheld device and they measured both the strength or force that they used and how long they persisted in it. Before they squeezed the trigger, they were subliminally exposed to exertion words like force, strength, and they had others who were exposed to both the exertion words and to reward-related words. And then there was a third group who was exposed to neither. And what happened was that the groups that were subliminally exposed to the exertion words had increased amount of force that they used in squeezing the trigger, but only the group that was exposed to both the exertion words and the reward-related words persisted in that. So they squeezed for a much longer amount of time. And their brains recruited more muscles in order to achieve that force. So what's happening here? Well, there are areas of the brain that have to deal with reward cues that are only activated when those rewards are subliminally cued. And those are the nucleus accumbens and the ventral striatum primarily. They're areas right around the amygdala that are not activated just by the subliminal cue for the behavior itself. They only become activated when they are cued with rewards. And so those have the ability to recruit other areas of the brain, which in turn recruit more muscles and resources toward that goal. So by cueing both the behavior and the reward together, you not only get the behavior activated, but you get it persisting long term. So tip number 2 is, in addition to the subliminal cues that you have around your house, around your work, that are related to the behaviors that you want to do, also include subliminal cues that are related to the rewards that you will get from pursuing those goals. So think about what are the rewards you want, what are the results you want, what it is that really motivates you, and create cues for those. So for example, on the sticky note, in addition to writing words related to the behavior, you're going to write words related to those rewards that you want. Whether it's ripped, you can see your six-pack, you're more healthy, whatever it may be, include cues that are reward related and put those around you where you will see them subconsciously. And if you can find objects that are related to your rewards as well, include those. Anything that you can do, the more different types of subliminal activation you can include, the more power and the more value you're going to get out of them. So going back to those two sides of the goal coin, there's the frontal cortex, which is cognitive. It's the way, how we're going to get it done. And then the amygdala, which is the will and the desire. With these subliminal cues, by cueing the behavior, we're bypassing the frontal cortex. And by cueing the reward, we are activating the amygdala and surrounding structures so that together we can get the ACC ultimately telling us go forward, move forward to that goal.
Our next tip, something called simultaneous goal pursuit. And this is one of the coolest brain hacks that I'm going to give you. In a study done in 2018, researchers had participants do a mental challenge. It was a puzzle, and there was two different parts to the puzzle, and they had different amounts of rewards assigned to each of the two puzzles. They had maybe $10 to the first and $20 to the second. But they had half of the participants do one puzzle and then switch to doing the other and then switch back until they were both done. The second group, they had them doing the same thing, but they told them that both puzzles were part of the same goal. It was one task, even though they were switching between physically doing one versus the other, in their mind, it was all one goal. And then they recorded their brains to find out how much the motivationally related areas of the brain were fired and activated during those tasks. Well, in the first group, where they were told they were two different goals, their brains processed the value of those goals separately. The value of the first was 10, the value of the second was 20. But with the second group, where they were told it was all one goal, the brain put them together. It analyzed the two different activities and said, okay, those are part of the same goal, and so the total value of doing this is 30. It added them together. So what's happening here is there's an area in the frontal brain called the anterior prefrontal cortex. And that is an area that allows us to pursue two different goals simultaneously, but it can only assign one value to those goals when they're being done simultaneously. So when the students were doing the two different puzzles, one puzzle and the reward that was assigned to it, maybe $10, was assigned to an area of the brain called the MFC, but to the right MFC. And then the other puzzle and its related reward was assigned to the left MFC. And if the frontal brain, that anterior prefrontal cortex, is told that these are separate goals, they're being done sequentially rather than in parallel, it will assign the relative amount of value to each separately. But when the brain is told that these, even though they're two different goals, they are being done simultaneously, it will assign the total amount of value to both of them. So instead of having $20 here, $10 here, and a total of $30, the brain is going to assign the total of 30 to both goals, both actions, which means there's a total of $60 on the line according to your brain. Now, I know that may get a little complex, but what's important is this is an aspect of how your brain functions that we can hack into and tap in order to get our brain to perceive our goal, our fitness goal, as even larger reward than it would be by itself. What we need to do is to have two different goals that you can perform at the same time. One example is, say, hydration. Maybe you want to focus on better hydrating your body, and if you research all the benefits of hydration, it's very significant. And what you decide to do is you will drink more water while you work out. And so, since you're doing them simultaneously, even though they're two separate goals, your brain will assign the total value to both of them. So all of a sudden, the value of working out increased because the brain is adding the value of hydration to it. And it doesn't have to be hydration, but there are multiple different goals that you can assign to yourself and you can do simultaneously as you work out. And it could even be the same action. Let's say, working out, you have a goal that you want to be healthier, but you also have a goal that you want to participate in a bodybuilding competition, right? There's just the intrinsic value of being healthier, being stronger, and then there's the goal of winning a competition. And so your brain will add those both together and assign the total value to the action. The next strategy is something called implementation intentions. And that means that you are looking into the future in implementing your goal, and you're telling yourself, when X happens, I will do Y. And in our case, we're going to think of the different excuses and the different obstacles that come up to prevent us from doing the behaviors that lead to our goals. So you know yourself, sit down and think, all right, what are the excuses I usually make to myself? What usually happens that makes it so that I don't work out or don't do whatever it is that leads you to your goal? And then set specific implementation intentions for those obstacles. And again, it's important that they are specific. So let's use an example. Let's say eating healthier is part of your fitness goal. And when you walk by a bakery and you smell cookies, you usually will go in and buy those cookies. So you know that about yourself. And so when you're sitting down and you're creating your implementations, you'll say, when I'm walking on the street and I smell those cookies, I will drop down and do 10 push-ups and then plug my nose and walk away, right? That's a silly example, but it's a good example because it has to be specific. Specific obstacles that come up and specific actions in order to prevent that from happening or from doing what needs to be done. And what we're doing here is we are retraining the amygdala, right? So the amygdala, the emotional center, it is not good at waiting for what it wants, right? It's immediate, it's emotional, it wants immediate gratification. So when situations come up and what we've done in the past is eat that cookie, and it knows, it can feel that dopamine's already starting to release, it says, I want to eat that cookie now, right? And so by doing these implementation intentions, we are reprogramming our amygdala. By using our frontal lobe, right, and we're creating those intentions, we have specific things we're going to do, that will talk to the ACC, which in turn talks to the amygdala and says, wait a minute here, we don't see as much value in that action as we did previously. And then it will buy you time in order to implement whatever you have planned and get past that specific situation. And this has been shown in countless studies to be very effective and across the board for behaviors. For example, there was a study done in 1999 which proved that specific implementation intentions could prevent even prejudicial feelings or internal biases that come up in people when they see certain situations. They did it on, for example, a bias against homeless people and for prejudice against the elderly. Just tons of examples where setting these specific intentions can reprogram your amygdala to not fire the way that it did previously. But it's only effective if prepared beforehand. That's why when you are setting your goal, this is something you have to do right from the outset. You have to sit down and physically write down the objections, the challenges that you usually face, and then write what you're going to do when those come up. If you try to do it in the moment, you're walking past that bakery and you haven't created implementation intentions, that amygdala is going to override your frontal cortex. It's going to be way too powerful, and it doesn't have any pre-programmed excuse or reason not to behave the way it always has. Now, the next few tips are going to be centered around the strategy of meditation. It's actually mindfulness together with meditation, pieces of each. Some people use them interchangeably. There are differences, but in our situation, it doesn't matter. I'm going to just call it meditation because I'm going to tell you specifically what to do. But first, does meditation really work? Does it even have an effect? The answer is yes, it has an extremely powerful effect when done right. A Harvard study done in 2011 showed that after just 8 weeks of meditation using an MRI, the researchers were able to find measurable changes in the size of the participants' amygdala and hippocampus and anterior cingulate cortex, three of the most pivotal structures for motivation and goal orientation. Another study done in 2015 where researchers used a strategy called single photon emission computed tomography to measure the cerebral blood flow in certain areas of the brain. They had participants do meditation for just 5 days. And after 5 days, they already saw a significant increase in blood flow in the anterior cingulate cortex. That's this area that is so important in managing both the will, amygdala, and the way, frontal cortex. And what's the importance of cerebral blood flow increasing? Well, that helps with neuroplasticity. The more cerebral blood flow going on in a particular area, the faster that area can undergo neuroplasticity and rewire itself and learn new things, form new connections, all of it. So meditation targets the exact structures that we need to in order to have our brain become more wired to help us to achieve our goals. But what stops most people from participating or doing meditation is they have no idea what to do or how to do it. They think, well, I just got to sit cross-legged on the floor for an hour and think of nothing, wipe my mind clean. Well, I'm going to give you 5 specific things to think of, to go over in your mind during this time of meditation, and just 1 minute of thinking, going over each of these will drastically increase your ability to achieve your goals. The first is around something called identity-influenced motivation. In a large study done in 2011, researchers had voters fill out 2 different surveys that were randomly assigned. In the first survey, the questions were all action-oriented or behavior-oriented, as in, do you vote? In the second survey, the questions were all identity-oriented. Are you a voter? Right? See that difference there. It's subtle, but do you vote versus are you a voter is significantly different, because the second has to do with our identity, while the first does not. And the voters who filled out the form that was identity-oriented were significantly more likely to actually show up to vote than the first. A second fascinating study done in 2013, the researchers had a bunch of participants get together, and each participant had to tell the researchers from a bucket of money how much was actually theirs, how much they were entitled to. But before making the decision and telling them how much of the money was theirs, as part of the participation form, there was a sentence at the bottom that said either don't cheat or don't be a cheater. And these were randomly distributed to the participants, and what they found was that people who had signed the form that said don't cheat were significantly more likely to cheat and to claim that more money was theirs than actually was than people who filled out the form don't be a cheater. And that is because of, again, this concept of identity. Don't be a cheater. That is reflective of who that person is. Whereas don't cheat, well, you don't have to be a cheater to sometimes cheat, so it's not as connected to who they are, and so it's not as powerful. What's happening here is there's an area of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex, which is part of this frontal cortex, and that area is in charge of identity, of figuring out and staying true to who you are as a person. And so when that area of the brain sees or hears things that are identity related, I am something, that thing will fire. And it does not fire under just behavior and action-oriented terms. And what that does is it influences the rest of the brain and the ACC in order to make sure that you are acting in line with who you are as a person, or more accurately, with who you believe yourself to be as a person. And so we can hack into this and take advantage of that principle in meditation by telling ourselves that working out is not just an action that you do, you are somebody who works out. Becoming strong is not just something that you want to do, it's a part of who you are. And so telling yourself that, in this example, it's your fitness goal, that it is part of who you are, not just what you do, then your brain is going to make sure that you act in line with who you believe you are. The next meditation strategy is very similar, and it's something called self-affirmation. In a study done in 2014, researchers had patients who were dealing with some sort of chronic illness, randomly assigned half of them to do 1 week of self-affirmation training, the others not. And in that self-affirmation training, they had them meditate about their core values and then think about how physical activity could help them achieve those core values. For as long as the researchers followed up with them afterwards, the patients who had undergone the self-affirmation training had significantly more physical activity and exercise that they did in their lives than those who did not undergo that training. And again, this is similar to identity motivation, but it activates a different part of the brain. There's an area of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex that is responsible for our core values and making sure that we act in line with them and placing more value on things that are linked to our core values. So the second thing that you're going to think of in meditation is to review all of the core values in your life and then think about how your exercise, how your whatever your goal related behavior is connected to helping you maintain those core values. And then you'll have the added benefit of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex telling the rest of your brain that we need to do those goal-oriented behaviors. The next meditation strategy is something called reappraisal. And that is where you think of the triggers in your life that take away from your goal-oriented behavior or somehow prevent you from achieving your goals, and then reanalyze those triggers in your brain and tell yourself why you don't want to act that way or why you do want to act that way. In a study done in 2019, researchers took a group of people with anxiety-related disorders or trauma-related disorders like PTSD and then had them do 4 weeks of reappraisal meditation where they thought about their triggers and then reanalyzed them and told themselves why they didn't have to act the way that they did when those triggers presented. And then after those 4 weeks, they took them back, hooked them up to an fMRI, and found that when they were exposed to those triggers, there was significantly less amygdala activity than before they had done that reappraisal training. So what reappraisal is doing is it's reprogramming your amygdala. You're using your frontal brain to pull those triggers and think about the things that usually make you act in a way you don't want to, and then tell yourself why you don't want to do it, and that trickles down to the anterior cingulate cortex, which in turn speaks with the amygdala, and you're gradually reprogramming your amygdala to not attach as much significance or fear or whatever it is to that cue. For our purposes, this goes hand in hand with the implementation intentions we discussed earlier, using the bakery example. When you walk by that bakery, you smell the cookies, your amygdala is firing, right, and telling you to go eat that cookie. Well, you created your implementation intentions beforehand, so you're able to give yourself some time in order to implement some sort of alternative action, but if you have done the reappraisal training, your amygdala will not even be firing as much as it would have otherwise. So what the strategy is after you have written your implementation intentions, where you've written all of the triggers and excuses, whatever it is that usually keeps you from achieving your goal, and then in addition to writing those specific implementations of what you're going to do instead, you will think about those triggers for 1 minute each morning and reprogram your amygdala and say, okay, why that obstacle is not going to be an obstacle anymore in your life. And then for the next strategy, we are going to use this reappraisal strategy in order to increase the amygdala firing that we do want. And this is really specific to physical exercise, but when you work out, your body releases endorphins that tell you, man, that was good. After you've worked out, that's why you feel good. It's those endorphins that are going around in your brain. It's dopamine that has been released. And so what we're going to do is every time after you work out, you have done your goal-oriented behavior, take a second and force yourself to think of how you feel and connect that to the behavior. Tell yourself, all right, I'm feeling great right now. It's because I just worked out, right? And seems a little silly, but what that will do is it will improve the amygdala firing that you want when you are trying to get the motivation to do the goal-oriented behavior, when you're trying to get the motivation to work out. Remember, your brain is always going to do two things. It's going to take the frontal cortex and analyze the decision logically, and then the amygdala is going to tell you how much you value that thing, and your ACC will put them together. And so in taking the time to really program your amygdala to understand that I feel really good because I just worked out, then the next time it comes to make a decision of working out or not, that amygdala is going to work more powerfully on your behalf to give you the motivation you need and recognize the value of doing that behavior more. The final meditation strategy is probably the most powerful of the 5, and it's something called the endowment effect. It's somewhat related to identity motivation, but the endowment effect says that we place much more value in something that we already have than something that we have not yet obtained. There was a recent study done by Cornell University in 2019 where they gave students mugs, and they had logos of the school on them, and then after the students had received the mugs, the teachers came back and offered to trade them some chocolate for the mug, and almost none of the students accepted the trade. However, when they later took students and gave them chocolate, and then came back and offered to trade them the mug, the logoed mug for the chocolate, almost none of them would make the trade. So what is the deal here? Well, it's that the students were subconsciously placing more value on something that they already had in their possession. And this effect is created by an area of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex. And so you can tap into this by, during 1 minute of your meditation, envision yourself as already having received your goals. You may have heard this before. It's a strategy that many success and life coaches propagate, and it's because of this. It actually does work. When you envision yourself as already possessing something, then you will subconsciously act as if you already had it, and the loss aversion kicks in that we discussed previously, and we don't want to lose that. Studies have shown that for the endowment effect to take place, you don't actually have to have the thing in possession, just a reasonable expectation that it will be yours. And so during this time of meditation, when you envision yourself as already having your goal, so already being, say you wanted to increase the size of your arms are already that size, right? Then you're not going to want to lose them. And so your brain will get you to do the behaviors that will maintain that status, which will inevitably get you to where you want to be. And those are the 5 principles that you should go over in your mind when you meditate. So when I say my advice is to meditate for 5 minutes a day, Remember, those are the 5 things that I want you to go over in your mind. You don't have to be in any position. Just close your eyes and make sure you're relaxed, and then take 5 minutes to go over each of those 5 things, those 5 principles in your mind, and you will see results quickly. Your brain can't help but change when you do this, and within a few days, it will start to be easier to achieve your goals, and you will be able to achieve that neuroplasticity to rewire your brain to be focused towards achieving your goals much faster, much more efficiently, and it will be much easier for you to do so. And my last tip with meditation is to do it either right when you wake up in the morning or right before you go to sleep, or both if you'd like. But the reason is that our subconscious mind is most susceptible to this type of stimulation early in the morning and late at night. And it has to do with the brain waves that are predominant. You want to target your brain when alpha brain waves are the most abundant in your brain, and those times happen to be right after you wake up and right before you go to bed. And if you thought this video was valuable, I'd appreciate you giving a like and a comment, as those things help the YouTube algorithm and others find my channel. Share this video with any of your family or friends, especially if you have somebody that you work out with. Remember the power of interpersonal goals and how someone else's values and goals can increase your own motivation. If you have any feedback or specific content requests of what you'd like to see me go over, I will leave a link to a feedback form and content request form in the video description. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so that you don't miss any of my future content. Mahalo, my friends. Until next time.